Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm just going to say a few things. We won't keep you very long. It's amazing to see all your faces. I owe so many of you so many thanks. What I'd like to do is start to read just a little tiny reading from the book. I know you've all read it twice. most of the parts of it anyway, but I just wanted to read one tiny bit, and then I'll say a few words, and then we will hand over to a very special guest to launch the book. All right, so this chapter is called Why Changing Your Mind is Good for You, and I've written about changing your opinion because, you know, quite a long time ago, I really believed some stupid stuff. I mean, there are things that I believed in and that I thought were good ideas, they're terrible ideas. And I don't mind saying that. That's the human journey. That's part of life. And I'm hoping that I'm moving towards a less stupid position, but who knows? But on reading, I think I occupy one that's well supported by research. So the position that I occupy is not my opinion. It's based on convergent research, and I'm happy to change my mind should I be doing the wrong thing in my job. And that's why I've written this chapter particularly, Why Changing Your Mind is Good for You. So I'll read you a little bit from that. The vast majority of children can learn to read and write. It is a primary school's job to ensure that this happens, and yet many children enter and leave school high school illiterate. A teaching career provides opportunities to grow professionally. It's a career with lifelong learning at its heart. Some teachers are fortunate enough to have excellent training and mentoring from the start, whilst others are disadvantaged by being equipped with low quality tools. Some educators are prepared to make the necessary changes in their own practice to keep up with research. Others have no urge to do this, and still others actively oppose it. This chapter brings together some of my experiences with teachers. In arguments about teaching reading, my colleagues and I have often been accused of teacher bashing. Nothing could be further from the truth. Sometimes teachers simply get bad tools to work with. Sometimes they get false information. What they do when they realise this can be described using three broad teacher types. Type 1 is the lifelong learner. I'm not going to read everything about the lifelong learner, but I think that's who we have in the room. So you probably recognise yourself as someone who is willing to change in the face of overwhelming evidence. Then you have the blissful plodder, and I've written an anecdote about a blissful plodder I knew, someone who's just unaware that there is anything to change, and who's actually quite nice. I know a lot of blissful plodders, fairly old principals, let's say, who've just got to, they've just got through their career being nice, and they don't really give a fig for research because it's all about being nice, and that's fine. I think I'm going to do a couple of musical quotes, but I think Morrissey said, and Morrissey's my hero from the Smiths, he said, "Don't talk to me, about people who are nice. I've spent my whole life in ruins because of people who are nice." But that's Morrissey. He's a little bit gross. I love nice people, but the blissful plodders are nice, and so present company accepted, Richard. But they're hard to argue with because they're nice, and they're not really interested in changing. They're not really interested in confrontation. So that's the blissful plodder, should I say. Blissful prodders are ones that work in cattle markets. So I have problems with R and L. Type 3, though, is the rigid idealist. Rigid idealists are those who remain inflexible in their opinions despite evidence to the contrary, and who stick doggedly to what they initially thought was correct. If they manage to create an empire whilst doing so, that's very bad news for children. I've written also about the case of Marie Clay, and this is doing the rounds right now on social media, where she was with a government committee, or she was put in front of a government committee in the United States, who had, I think, 66 billion, no wait, that sounds like a lot, I think it was 66 million. I do words, numbers? No idea. 66 something. It's quite impressive.
An impressive number.
An impressive number around the figure of 66. Anyway, or maybe 6. Who knows, or 8. I don't know. But it's lots of money. And the government had this money to spend, And Mary Clay came, and she's the originator of Reading Recovery. Don't know if you've heard of Reading Recovery. That's lovely. She came to Bob Sweet, who's has been one of my mentors on this project, and he's done a lot in the United States to get, is he a politician? I suppose he's a political advisor, and he's done a lot to help change the scene there in the United States. She came to a meeting with him because they wanted a slice of that massive money cake for education reform in teaching literacy. And Bob was really across the research and what works, and he said, look, Reading Recovery actually doesn't really fit in with this. And I quote, this is what Bob wrote to me and allowed me to put in the book. He said, I told her that Reading Recovery did not meet the requirements of the new legislation, and that unless they changed the program, it would not be funded. At that point, Dame Clay, and she was made Dame, Dame Clay looked at me with steely eyes and said, we will not change a thing in our program, but we will modify our description of Reading Recovery to comply with the law. To which Bob retorted, I think that is one of the most despicable things anyone has ever said to me. And it is despicable because Reading Recovery is alive and well all over the world. But this isn't just about bashing Reading Recovery, it's about bashing lots of things. I love to bash. So, I'll end the reading basically by saying, my colleagues and I are supporters and practitioners of structured, explicit, systematic literacy instruction, with phonological awareness and phonics as a starting point. Collectively, we've worked for hundreds of thousands of hours with countless children. I don't think it would be untrue, though, if I were to state that if we were presented with convincing evidence that something other than what we are doing right now is better for children, we would, one and all, gladly admit that we were wrong. And we would, without hesitation, embrace the new method. So what kind of teacher are you? What kind of teacher is your child's teacher? It's time to demand and supply higher quality literacy instruction for everyone. It's time that teachers overcame the limitations of their training, their school environment, or the education system itself, and challenged plodders and idealists. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to say about writing this book, apart from the huge thanks that I owe to everybody. I've listed people I want to thank in there. That's amazing that an iPhone hit the ground when it wasn't one of my children. Oh dear. Doing this project, there's so many people I want to thank, and I've listed them in the book, so I'm not actually going to stand up and thank everyone because I will miss someone out, and then everyone will be stabbed and we'll all have fights and everything. So, it's all in there. But the other people that I want to thank are the ones where, when I was on this project, I remarked to a mentor when I was talking to them about the project that looking into all of the people that are involved in literacy research over the last 100 years, it was like catching up with old friends. It's actually like catching up with old friends. And I found all of these facets of their personalities that I didn't know about. I just read the research, and I've read their names over and over again in the research that came up. But actually looking into their birth date and where they were from and something about them was amazing. It was like catching up with old friends. I didn't know that Maggie Snowling and Charles Hume, I'm going to say Hume, okay, good. So Charles, spelled really strangely, they were married. If you've heard of Snowling and Hume, they were married. Keith Stanovich, when he started his research, had a top-down bias. He actually was one of those people who thought the meaning came first and then all of the phonological awareness of phonics. He started with that bias and he admits that bias. I didn't know any of this. I just read his papers and didn't really look into it. So it was quite amazing to scratch the surface there. And what you find when you scratch the surface, what you see, is that people have been working long and hard. People of goodwill have been working long and hard, and they have made huge sacrifices to try to get high quality literacy instruction to everyone. You begin to get a true picture of the many fronts that they've had to defend. It starts to become clear how many territories they've needed to conquer or advance into just to have high quality literacy instruction accepted. It's called the Reading Wars for a reason. Those who roll their eyes and call it a tedious debate have no understanding or appreciation of the sacrifices that these people have made. And that's just the soldiers. We're fighting an enemy that is indifferent to the suffering of those casualties. Those casualties are the millions of children who are not being taught to read because of low quality literacy instruction. When writing this book, I became aware of the fact that structured literacy, which is what we're all about, and whole language, which is sort of the diametrically opposed philosophy, I suppose. And I call it a philosophy. What we do is not philosophical, but the other side has a philosophical stance. It's in fact the tip of an iceberg. Beneath that iceberg is the fight between progressive and traditional education. But what I didn't, and I sort of knew that too, but what I didn't realise was that the bulk of the iceberg was underneath that, and that iceberg is actually the fight between reason, science and humanism, against foolishness, superstition, and ultimately against fascism. Scholarly debate, diplomacy, polite reason, they've all got their place. But maybe because I'm a Scot, maybe because I have a sort of personality that enjoys conflict, maybe because I still have hope that humans can rise to greater heights of civilization and reason and innovation. Maybe there's also a place for fierceness. Maybe there's a place for ruthless rejection of shoddy ideas. Maybe it's not only acceptable but necessary to stare down our opponents, the rigid idealists, to stare down our opponents, the people that throw people under a bus or throw everyone under a bus for the sake of their brand. Maybe it's acceptable to tell them, and to quote Lyn Reed, there's no ground common enough for me and you. That's the bad news, isn't it? The good news is that many people do have a clear vision of the necessary and sufficient conditions to teach all mainstream school children to read and write proficiently. There's a growing movement, and we're connected by social media. And if that's intelligently organised, that movement stands to make a significant difference. I've had a lot of help with this book, and this book is ultimately by, about, and for them. I thank you all.